Thank you everybody for coming. If you don't know me already, my name is Eric Nord. I am the director of Leon Gallery. And this evening, we're going to have a nice conversation between Matt Harris and Don Fodness, two artists and educators in the Denver community. Don has shown at David B. Smith. Earlier this year, he showed at Emmanuel Gallery along with Tobias Fike in Timely and Timeless, and currently has some work in wordplay at the Arvada Center. And Matt Harris has also shown at David B. Smith. He also showed at Leon Gallery previously, a number of years ago, with an exhibition called Baroque Selfies. His exhibition, known as Snowfall, has been on view at Leon for the past several weeks. There is still 1 week left. It closes on Saturday, the 16th. And then there is some wonderful news that Matt might share with everyone about an upcoming exhibition that he will be having in Europe. So I am going to should I make Matt the host or should I make Don the host?
Either way, you can apply it to me if you want. Yeah, thank you for that, Eric, and thank you for arranging this and for providing me with the opportunity to exhibit at Leon. Couple of things to point out before we get started is if you haven't seen the work in person, I put a link, the first in the chat. So there's a link to Leon's website, and you can browse through images while we're talking, because I would assume most of us are visual people. And it might be helpful to have some of those available while we're talking. Also, Gretchen did an amazing write-up through Leon's Artist Writers Program, where I got to invite someone to write about the show, and Gretchen, I chose Gretchen, and she did an amazing job and gave me a lot of insights into the work, and I highly recommend you guys reading that. It will probably be more beautiful than anything I can come up with tonight. So, and then also Don, thank you for agreeing to do this. My hope was to try to do something different than a normal artist talk, where I'm sort of like the giving my sole perspective. Like, I'll still be giving my answers through my perspective, but I thought for you guys to be able to maybe like sit on the wall, be flies on the wall of like hearing Don and I talk about the work, and we will definitely have a time for questions at the end. So we're hoping to have at least 15 minutes or so at the end where you guys can dive in on questions too. So thanks for everyone being here, and Don, thanks for agreeing to do this. And I can hand it over to you, to Don.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me to do this. I think it sounds like a fun way to have a artist talk or an artist dialogue. You and I talk a lot as friends, and a lot of ideas come out of that, and it's grounding and expansive. And in one of our recent conversations, I told you about a friend of mine who I wrote letters to about my artwork, and I found that to be a very helpful way to explain what I was doing to him. And basically my artist statements ever since then have been basically extractions from what I would write to my friend Mark about my artwork to explain to him what I'm doing or what's going on. So I can really appreciate your different approach to this, because I think there's definitely a formality to this, but it's a different kind of formality. And I think allow your ideas to come through in a way that's creative and just a different approach. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about in relation to like me coming in late to this meeting and just technology in general, one of the things you had mentioned in your artist statement was this idea of slowing down in response to the tech world, or response to the world at large. Could be like political strife or just general things that are happening in the world, and you're seeing and using your artwork as a tool to slow down. And I told you that in your artwork, I see a lot of chaos, and I see a lot of movement. I see a lot of excitement happening in there. So for me, I see that the artwork itself could be more slowed down. I understand the impulse to slow down, but I wonder what you see for yourself in your lifestyle, as the most slowdown you could get before you're like, hey, I can't hang with this anymore. This is boring or not fun, or, like I actually want more excitement? And also in your artwork, could you be a minimalist? Like, could you see your work approaching minimalism? My guess is no, but where do you see your artwork going in terms of like the Matt Harris that is the most slowed down?
Yeah, that is a wonderful and challenging question, and I'll do my best to try to answer that. And so I would say that as you were describing it, a thought that came to my mind was there are multiple components of my life in which speed could be measured from slow to fast. And as you were describing it, I think that the slowness that I'm desiring is, this sounds funny to say out loud, but a mental slowness, where not that I'm a pretty introspective person, and for better or worse, but if I'm able to continue threads of thought and explore those ideas in my own head, I find that very enjoyable. And I feel like there are many different distractions going on right now, whether it's technology or politics or those other things, where it is always trying to grab my attention and pull me away from a thread of a thought. And so when I say slowing down, I don't know, like I do have some ideas of trying things that are maybe more minimal, but I don't think that that is exactly what I'm going for. I sort of see my artistic practice as this experiment each time I make a piece. And it is the physical activity of doing something that allows my mind to be focused on a singular action, and not to have 5 different conversations going on in my head at once.
It's like,
and so
you think of like meditation.
Yeah. And I find that I think in some ways like the physical, whatever it is, but allows me to be more engaged in what I'm doing than if I like the physical versus the digital. I feel like the digital landscape is meant to, as soon as you experience any sort of boredom, discomfort, or displeasure, it's like you can constantly click on something else. And that is this sort of like repetitive, habitual action that we're trained to. As soon as we don't like it, we can just change it and change it and change it and change it. And I see there being a value in something that has existed in the uncomfortable and sat with that and pushed with that. And so I do think that meditation is relative. I tend not to use that word so much because I think that not that it's inappropriate to use in relationship, but like it brings along this whole sort of like spirituality of like Eastern religions and Buddhism and all these sort of things that I think are socially attached to that word, if that makes sense. But definitely I would say like one of the main goals of meditation is to slow the mind down. And that is, I would say, something that I'm striving for. Yeah.
I get your impulse to veer from that kind of a language. I'm definitely working in the realm of painting and the tradition of painting, which is another question I have for you. But in relation to what you're saying, I'm listening to this audiobook right now about these different systems of our brain. We have fast thinking and slow thinking. The slow thinking is more mathematical and it requires sitting down, and actually sometimes our brains can deceive us about what what's the best choice. Most often we behave impulsively and intuitively, and we think we're being a lot more logical and reasonable than we are, unless we actually sit down and work through problems. But it sounds like, even though I see your work as very intuitive, it seems like you're still using your art as this opportunity to process the world and your life and the act of painting. That was, and we could keep going on in that conversation, but one thing that came up that I have a question about was this idea of tradition and, the tradition of the act of painting as a tradition. I'm curious how tradition plays out in your life in general, but also as an artist and in the act of painting and being an artist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a couple different threads that I want to pick up on there is I thought, as you were describing this like fast thinking versus slow thinking of the audiobook, and having, one be more logical and one be more intuitive. I like that language too, because I don't know if fast and slow are maybe the right terms for what I'm trying to describe. Maybe like duration, where I can have a continual internal conversation for a longer period of time, whether it be logic or intuition. Being able to just follow that thread is something that's important to me, and something that I think the current pace of society doesn't necessarily like encourage or create a lot of opportunities for. But the tradition question is, I'll try to answer that both in art and life. I would say that in art, I'm constantly interested in how the contemporary art world seems to always want something new and different. And that is what sort of gets attention. And I think that is a shortcoming, that we and that's a huge generalization of the contemporary art world and a kind of a pessimistic one. But I would say in general, at least like in education, we're always trying to like show like whoever's the most up and coming
thing.
What's that?
The hot new thing.
Yeah, the hot new thing. And I think that the conversation just gets so much more interesting when we recognize that like what we're doing now is probably not nearly as novel as we think it is. And that there were ways that people were doing that in the past. It just looks different, or the content is different. And so it feels like to be counter to the contemporary art world in my mind, and maybe this is naive, but by drawing from art history and tradition and using traditional means, and pulling that in to my vernacular, is challenging that idea that it should just be like quick and instant and splashy. And so that's like one thing with the tradition. And then for myself, in my life, I think that I'll have to think about that more. I have a sort of a romantic idea right now of like a more traditional lifestyle that is maybe sort of more rooted in like growing your own vegetables, or being more, I don't know, like I think I don't think it's a very clear picture, but I have this idea where it's like, if I could just live on a farm and like do that stuff, like that would somehow like slow me down. But I also recognize that farming is probably one of the hardest jobs in all of history. So it's this, I think that I'm recognizing my romanticizing of tradition, and I need to sort of evaluate those more of how they fit in my life. But on a smaller scale, like I think that like just like family traditions can hold a lot of importance and value, and meaning to individuals, myself included.
Yeah, when I was thinking about tradition, I was thinking about that idea of contemporary art world's like desire for the new and the fresh and the shocking. And I understand it to a degree as a person who likes to curate exhibitions, and a person myself who's curious about what's new out there. But with things changing so rapidly, it's hard to keep up on sometimes. And I think that novelty sometimes actually just gets old. Mm-hmm. And like you said, the things that we think are novel when we're younger, it's actually like, and it's almost like you find out someone else had done that before. It's kind of disappointing, and you almost get angry or something like that. And it's like, at some point in time, there's just value in being yourself and finding out who you are, and your own continuity and place in all of it. And it seems like you're also interested in that with this seems like your work is really process oriented, and it seems like you're really it's almost like you're sharpening yourself. And I've known you for a long time, and some of the work that I knew early on, what was very exciting, was like you would be just wild, like going all over the room and making, exciting things that were a big, beautiful mess. And I still think you have that within you, but it's very contained, within the parameters of a rectangular canvas or a sculpture. But I still see remnants of that, Matt, coming through when you place your sculpture in front of a painting, and there's this relationship that's happening installation wise. And we talked with Eric about the whole installation and the whole exhibition feeling like an installation, how pieces speak to another. And I think that happens in a lot of exhibitions. But he was talking about guests in the gallery mentioning how they see this vernacular emerging and pieces communicating with one another. So anyways, I guess I'm just kind of rambling, but I see this suspension between tradition and between you're discovering something new, at least within your own path as an artist. And I think that's interesting. It makes me think of a question or just a general topic I have for you that came up within our with a conversation with Eric recently about the idea of balance and like your work and your life as an artist being suspended between things. Like your last exhibition, there was a lot of figures that have this grotesque quality, and I think that still exists a little bit. You see figures in there, but there's oftentimes this balance between extremes, the ugly and the beautiful, I'm sure that we could come up with a number of ways that your work is suspended between things and between extremes. And I just wonder if you could talk about balance and aesthetically or just in general.
Yeah. Maybe this seems off topic, but one thing that came to mind when you were talking about that is like, the beautiful and the ugly and the good and the bad and all those sort of things that are in life. I think that, Don was probably one of the first people that, shortly after graduate school, when it felt like my life was not going the way that I wanted it to go, like I was sort of running out of money and I wasn't sure like if this art career thing was for me. And it just sort of, I feel that there's probably mostly self-imposed, but there's a desire to project that I have it together. And I remember at one point, like telling Don, like I didn't have it together. And his response of feeling like just grateful that I was willing to be vulnerable with him and that we could have those conversations made me realize that like being more authentic or being more vulnerable and being willing to show my imperfections actually made for a richer experience of our friendship. And I think I want to approach art that way, with that it doesn't need to be perfect, but I have a tendency to want to strive for perfection, but then everybody has a different idea of what that perfection is. And so I think that there's that constant balance between wanting there to be order and feeling like there's chaos in my life or my art, but trying to find some sense of order that is like okay enough, if that makes sense. And being in that sort of in-betweenness, like you say. And I think that like you're saying, it's sort of a way for me to process life. And I think that that's absolutely true. And it is a way of I'm not sure, I'm a little lost for words, but I think it's such a good question that I want to find the right words. And there's I mean, it's funny, like right now it's like, oh, I don't want to like stop and think because then there'll be an awkward silence. But then like at the same time, I want to be okay with that. And I think that I want to make work that feels a little bit awkward, maybe because life is pretty awkward. But at the same time, it can't be so awkward that people aren't able to sort of approach it because, there are strangers. Like, I think there are different levels of vulnerabilities as we get to know each other. But at the same time, my hope is that with the work, as you get to know the work more and more, you can sort of see some of that in there. But that it's still like it's inviting and not totally off-putting at the beginning to be so awkward.
It's like you were saying with slowing down and these different speeds of duration. It's like, for the viewer, there could be a reward for a long-term, letting your eyes kind of adjust to like it's like when I go camping, I don't like my kids to use flashlights because I'm like, your eyes will adjust to the night if you just stay out here and look on your own for a little while. And it's like letting the viewer reward themselves for letting themselves acclimate to your work over time. And I hear that something in that realm going on with what you want for the viewer. But on that topic, that was another big question that I had, is what do you want for the viewer? You're slowing down with your artwork. I know there's some issues around that word, that language, but you have this very personal process that you're doing with the act of painting and with what's going on with your mind. And I hear you basically hint at this a little bit, but can you clarify and expand on what you want for your viewer in seeing your artwork and experiencing your artwork, but also in relation to some of the things that you mentioned in your artist statement, like technology and the larger world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I want their initial reaction, maybe, if, it's a little, feels strange to be like, I know that this is part of the art world, and we think about like how viewers respond, and I definitely am making work towards a viewership, but I want them to think it's strange. I want them to look at it and have a sensation of that's strange, because I think that something that's strange is out of the ordinary, and I feel that a large portion of our lives are experiencing very ordinary things. And I think that, ordinary things can be beautiful in of themselves, but I also think that there's a realm where we can play and twist and manipulate the ordinary to have it be a little bit off. And I'm not necessarily like referencing the everyday, but like like if it's like strange enough for them to sort of question it and look a little bit longer, then in my mind that's successful. And then I also think that if it's strange, then the human eye wants to figure things out. Like, we want there to be order. Like, we can figure out a human face like so fast, like with just components of our eyes, like taking in that information. And I want there to be a slight bit of confusion in looking at the work, because just like I want my life to be like perfectly balanced, and I want to have like this slow, like meditative, like thinking where my thoughts don't get interrupted. Like, that doesn't really exist in reality. But I think that I have a desire for order, but the fact that it's unachievable is part of just an acceptance of that. And then creating images to me that are confusing, awkward, strange, but still have some level of aesthetic beauty that can be appealing, but then also confusing, is I'm hoping that can hit on a visual level, and will try that a viewer's eye would try to figure out what is going on. And then at that point, if they're engaged enough, then there is some, trying to figure, for them, pulling out a psychology or narrative or meaning or forms that have meaning to them. And so it's sort of, maybe it's just like a hook. I'm not sure, but I think that it's interesting to try to, for myself at least, challenge what is a non-extraordinary form versus an extraordinary form. Like, how do I derive that?
Yeah, it sounds like you wanting people to sit in a place of suspension, like we talked about, suspending between and balance. But you're wanting people to be not necessarily comfortable, but wanting them to take time to sit in discomfort, and it's like that moment when you find the thing that hasn't been categorized yet, and you're interested in that. And I think through our conversations in the past, I know that you have an interest in the viewer, people basically visiting and exploring complexity and being comfortable not knowing. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yeah. Definitely like this sort of, I think, like just curiosity. I feel like, I have a sort of like academic, serious side to me. And then I also have this pretty like curious and silly side to me, where I'm willing to just explore things that are strange. Like, for a while, I was like trying to hand weed clover in my backyard. And it was just like a solid patch. And it's like, just like a completely impossible feat. Like it just like, I would have to be spending years and do it like full time, because it just like grows back faster than I could like pull it for like 10 minutes at night. But then like after a while, like it became this weird tradition or habit where I could go out at night and do that for 10-15 minutes and during the summer. And then like all of a sudden I was like up to my nose, like at the soil level, and like looking, I could like distinguish like almost with my fingers, if I've done it for a while, like what was a clover root versus like a grass root. And then like as I was falling asleep, it sort of like my mind would be like replaying that sensation. And that's just like such a like weird, bizarre thing, but it is interesting to have like a level of curiosity where, you know, it's like we have these like micro worlds in our backyard and then these like huge cosmos. And so that sort of like, to me, I feel like sometimes I just sort of like map the world to my understanding because that is comfortable. Like, I'm like, oh, I get this. Like, it's like we overlook things because we understand it.
Yeah,
We think we understand it. But then when we start getting curious, we realize like, that's crazy that there's like a forest in my yard, but like on a micro level.
And on that topic, one thing I see happen in your work a lot is this interest in curiosity and play. And the way you described it is something that I think about play a lot. Like, I'm interested in play as an artist, but I think along with plays, there's this learning that happens. And so the way you talked about learning about the plant and learning about your backyard, and then it starts to become ingrained in your subconscious. And maybe there's a point when you start to know enough about it that you abandon it, because for you specifically, because I see your work as having a roughness to it and a rawness to it. And I see you playing, and I see you learning, and then I see you kind of like let something go. Like once you're like, I think I understand that enough, I'm going to go play with this thing over here that I don't understand. And I see you throw in variables that mix things up for yourself and cause you to have to learn new problem solving or new relationships. And so that's one thing that I'm seeing in relation to what you just said, and was a general interest in mine and having in this discussion. But that also leads me to another, because I think we're probably going to run out on time that you and I have to talk before we open up to the group. One thing that I see in your artwork is just a unique color palette and a unique attention to surfaces and types of materials. And going back to this idea of the new, and you again being suspended between being attracted to the new and repulsed by it, or wanting some tradition or something like that. I've seen you attracted to the new. I've seen you go out and get streamers and brightly colored manufactured things that are the most attractive glittery surface. And then I've seen you use really dull tempera paints that I think would be kind of boring, but you've put these things together in a way that's new for you. And it seems like you're learning and playing. So maybe you could encompass some of the things I just said, like around play, learning, and then could you talk about your color palette materials a little bit?
Yeah. It's interesting, because I do think that as soon as it's, I don't know, this sounds cliche to say, but I think it's true to my experience. It's like when I figure something out in the studio, it sort of loses interest for me. And so, like you said, like throwing in different variables that can confuse me or give me, like, it's funny that like as artists, it's like I totally think that we just like create our own problem and then try to come up for a solution for it. And that problem can be anything that we invented. But it is, it can either start with like a material problem or an aesthetic problem or a life problem that I'm trying to use my art to sort of like better understand that situation. But I come to it, I try to come to it in a playful way, because that's probably how I wish I would come to it in my life, in a playful way. But it sometimes maybe feels like higher stakes if I'm trying to figure something out of my life. And I think then my logical like side like kicks in and be like, okay, I'm just gonna like sit down and like write out the pros and cons and like make a decision. And that like applying order to that decision making maybe gives me a sense of comfort, but I don't think it like improves my decision making. And so to be able to know that the art making that I make I can be more intuitive, and I don't have to be logical, and I can be more playful. And maybe that is a training of myself to recognize that that method of approaching problems that I've created can still have positive outcomes and solutions, and give me confidence in bringing that sort of approach to my like non-studio problems, and also just like not taking myself so seriously, in both categories. And then in regards to the color palette, it's something that a lot of people have responded to for this show, and it was funny, like when so Eric Nord and Eric Dallimore came over for a studio visit, they're like, whoa, these are pretty bright and loud. And I was like, really? I didn't like fully see that. But I do see it now, like later, like, so I'd like wrap some of them up and put them away, and then was getting them back off the show. And then I was like, yeah, these are pretty loud. And I wish I like, could say that like, oh, I like have this like deep, like color theory, meaning to all of this, but this is this sort of like play where I like to have 50 to 75 colors available to me, like already ready to go. I don't enjoy the having to mix while I'm painting, because that is like a very different process for me. And if I'm trying to get a certain color, then there seems like there's like a right or a wrong. I'm like, I need this color. And then I could spend like 2 hours trying to get that color perfect. And then I haven't put any paint on the canvas. And so it's more of, if I just have a bunch of colors around, then I can put it on the canvas. And if it doesn't look right, I could just put a different paint over top of it. And I see that as me also, like, by having colors pre-mixed, it's not that there's a sense of chance, but there can be like unexpected color relationships that happen that I'm making intuitively, rather than like logically determining a palette before I start. So that's sort of, yeah, there, in a nutshell, it's like, I just like those colors, but other people think that they're weird. So that's great.
Eric, I wonder where we're at with time. Should we open up pretty soon to the group? I have a question that I like to always ask artists. Like, I think about it for myself, but it's like it could be a pretty quick answer, and then maybe we could open up to the group.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, we're at right about 30 minutes.
Okay. My question that I always want to hear from, like, I think it would be fun to write a book or have a book of artists like answers to this question, but what actually, and maybe there already is one, but it'd just be fun to see like an anthology of all these different answers. What advice would you give to your younger self as an artist?
Yeah, I think that I would say that to tell myself younger, and probably something that I'm trying to tell myself now still, is to really evaluate my given definitions of success. I think that all these sort of art magazines and publications and blogs and museum promotions and this and that, like, give a definition of like what a successful artist is. And I think sometimes it's a little narrow. And I would say that throughout my like younger career and education, there was a kind of undertone that it was encouraged to sacrifice other areas of life, whether that be family, relationships, other things. Like, it was like, the more you sacrifice, the more chance you have for success. And that very well may be true, but again, that's like towards a very specific success. And I feel that the artists who are touted as successful are made to be like celebrities within the art world, and also made to be like rich or have lots of financial funding. And I think that, those two things, like having a celebrity name within the art world and getting lots of funding from that can allow you to achieve projects that you wouldn't otherwise, and certainly opens a lot of doors. But and it was always sort of this idea, like if you're making smaller things or they're not as spectacular, that it won't get attention. And so it's funny, like, because before this talk, like I was reading about this sort of movement, and it probably is like totally like socialist and communist, and I don't really like understand all that stuff, but like it's called this degrowth movement, where like we as a society determine a country's well-being by their GDP, like how much they're economically growing and producing every year. And I think the art world does that too for individual artists. And the degrowth movement is the idea that we determine a country's well-being by their like social and environmental like well-being. And it doesn't have anything to do with the sort of like amount that they're producing and selling to help the economy grow. And I think that, and I don't know, like I don't talk to a lot of artists who like are at the top and getting, you know, all this money and blue chip artists in these major galleries, but I think that, you know, you hear about movie star celebrities where it's like they've reached the pinnacle of what our contemporary society has defined as success, through money and being like well known, prestige, and that doesn't seem to always equate with like a happiness. And maybe I'm getting into sort of some fluffy things right now, but I truly believe that one of the most important things that I think young artists and students across fields need to evaluate is what are they defining as success, and how much of that is defined by themselves versus like how much it's defined by cultural, like even unconscious definitions of success. So that would be my advice.
I love this answer. You know, on every level that you walked through it, and you're one of your colleagues at the school you teach at, Dave Mesplay. When I was a young artist, he taught me this lesson, that a successful artist is an artist that's still making art, given all that we have going against us, to, you know, to keep making art. And I, you know, that's one definition of success. But the thing I appreciate what you're saying most is to define it for yourself, and to avoid these, you know, images that were projected onto us about what successful means. And I really appreciate that. And, you know, I think there's different ways to measure types of success, like you're talking about GDP and then happiness, and you know, all those things could work. But I think finding out for yourself what you want is really important, and even reevaluating that as you get to different phases in your life. And I have a former student who I've been visiting and talking with lately over the last couple of years, and he's really grateful to have gone to art school, but he now does construction. He has his own construction company. He's really does really amazing work, and he made this tiny house that could be award-winning, you know, aesthetically. But I think being able to apply your artistic life and skills in any way, I think is really important. But it seems like the art world really conditions us to measure ourselves as far as what ways we're successful. Are we showing in a gallery? Well, that's what you're supposed to do as an artist, or you know. But I think thinking about you know, living a meaningful life is really valuable too. You know, we could spend the whole rest of the conversation talking just about this kind of stuff, but I appreciate your answer, and I appreciate you taking it into this territory. Anyways, I kind of reached a blank spot in my mind with all that. It's good stuff. It's stuff I've been thinking a lot for myself lately, and so and it's probably stuff that you and I talk about a lot anyways, just being artists and people. But you know, you do have a level of success that is, you know, fits within the realm of what I think a lot of people think of as success. You know, you're the chair of a department, you're showing in a nice gallery, of an amazing exhibition up right now. But I still think it's interesting for you to hear you say, hey, we should really be questioning these things and continuing to reevaluate our life circumstance, our life in relation to what we're told we should be like.
Yeah.
I think we could maybe open it up to everybody else. One thing that I just wanted to comment on that is I've been talking to a lot of artists and trying to encourage them to think about it this way, and that what I view as successful artist is somebody who is resilient and is able to kind of adapt and survive over the years. And longevity and resiliency, I think, is very key. So if there's anybody that would like to ask a question of Matthew or Don, I guess.
Go for it, Toby.
Okay. I think it relates to just everything that you were just talking about, and maybe you touched on this a little bit, but I'm always curious because I think a lot of artists struggle with questioning sort of the why and what for, and what for you ultimately does, because you talk about becoming a farmer, right? What are the things that compel you to keep making art, or like why do you still keep doing it? Do you think? I mean, you may not know. Like I think I just have some weird addiction that I can't stop. So it could just be a problem.
Yeah, no, I really like that question. I think about it a lot, and I think that it's also, I think about like, making art is super inconvenient. And you've probably heard me say this before, but it's just like, it takes a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of energy. And, we're sort of like, at least like you can relate, it's like you have a family and kids, and Don, you too. And it's like this sort of, it at times can feel frivolous because, like, what's the point? Like my main goal right now is to like support my family financially and make sure that we're not like, just that we're comfortable, and that I'm invested in those relationships and spending time with those people. And, I have a full-time job. So then to try to fit this art making in there is just like, that's totally crazy. Like, that's a bad idea. That's a poor lifestyle choice. But like, I also
it's kind of frivolous too.
I was talking to my wife, Kristen, and trying to find language to, say why, like if there's been times where there's been a dry spell in the studio, like why it feels like something's missing. And I think that I could get this from a variety of different activities. And I don't subscribe to this sort of like, I make art because otherwise I would like cease to exist or be unhappy. But like when I was a kid, like I remember just being able to like be satisfied with like imagining things. Like I could just like be on the floor or on the ground and just be like imagining things. And it was like an exploration of whatever I was thinking about. And I think that art allows that for me. And I think that that's an important thing that I want to have in my life. And I also feel that I'm able to try really stupid things in the studio that like have pretty small consequences, where other areas of my life for the most part are fairly regimented. It's like I have to do this and this and this and this to like make sure that like I things are continuing to work the way that is flowing, and whereas in the studio, I think it's like play to some extent. Like it's a serious play to some level, but it allows me to do abnormal things that there is not space for me to do sort of in my day-to-day basis. And it feels like life can get kind of boring if I'm just doing the same repetitious day-to-day things. And so as an outlet to try things that are bizarre or strange, or just like, what do these two colors look like next to each other? And so it's this sort of like experimentation. But I think it's such a good question because it's like, we don't ask that of ourselves and each other enough. And also there can be a tendency to like have it be guilt driven. And I'm trying not to have that be like the reason that I'm making art.
Thanks.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if like how you see yourself, like you as a person going through life, if your growth has in any way been reflected in like how you approach making in your aesthetic with your artwork.
Yeah, I would say that like right now in this sort of like micro, like 2 to 3 years of like my growth or change as a person, has been letting go of this idea of a kind of like perfectly planned out art projects that are all clean, and it's like I have this idea and then I execute. And I think that is like, because I talked to Don and Toby about this, it's like there's just like I don't have long periods of time in the studio anymore. It's just like a half hour here or 45 minutes there, like maybe an hour and a half at the night. But it's very sporadic. And so I would say that I've gained a confidence in myself that if I accumulate time in the studio, something will come out of it. And that and it's okay to proceed without knowing as I get, like, I would say that like the beginning of a piece, like sometimes is pretty wide open, and I'm trying to get something going, some momentum, and then I have an idea of sort of like where it's going, and then it almost becomes labor at that point because I'm just trying to finish it so that it can get out to the world. And it has narrowed down what it's going to be. But there's still some level of uncertainty until it's like, okay, I think that's done. I need to put that aside and like think about it. And I would say that, I've been exploring with this idea of sort of just like whether the work that I make, is it better when I have a goal and I go after that goal, or is it better when I just sort of make things and find a goal through the making? And I don't know yet, but I think that it is to some extent a response to the available time that I have in the studio. Like right now, I have to exist in that space where I'm able to move around and try things out and try to get some traction and go for it, because I can't have these like long-ended explorations. And I wonder if when I'm older or have more time, maybe someday, that I will be more interested in thinking about what I want to make more, rather than using like making as a way to think through some ideas. But I don't know.
When you're sitting on your tractor, you can.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to dig big holes with a tractor and lift heavy things and then see what comes out of it. Agnes, I think that was a really good question, but holy cow, I think I just rambled a lot. So I'm sorry if that didn't make sense.
I wanted to go back to something that you guys were talking before, and that was that kind of balancing between two opposites of some kind, or like a certain sense of remaining unresolved within the work, as a way of having people remain interested and remain active within it. And one of the things that came up in my head when you guys were talking is E.E. Cummings, in relationship to poetry, always talked about how he was always attempting to suspend people between their intellectual understanding of a word and the more kind of the action of the word. And particularly, he often used nouns as verbs and as a way of trying to create movement or create action. And I think that your work in kind of setting up those struggles is a way of making it active and making it alive. And I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit about that, if you think that that is something that you are attempting to achieve.
Yeah, I like that. For the two people that have put questions in the chat, thank you. Those are coming up next. So I would say that yes, there is a struggle that is happening, and I can't say that I'm necessarily thinking of it in terms of language, of like nouns, or versus verbs and things like that. But I think that the world is way more complex than we will ever understand. And in order for us to sort of be comfortable in it, we have to have closed definitions of things in order for us just to be able to operate within this complex world. But I think that it's more interesting when we acknowledge that there's so much that we don't know and are able to sort of crack open our definitions of things a little bit on whatever, if that's like biology and science or religion or painting and sculpture and those sort of things. And so, yeah, I think that struggle is the wanting to be comfortable by having more narrower definitions of who I am and the world that I live in, but knowing that that is falling short of reality, and then wanting to break those open or expand those, but knowing that that is scary and to do that. And so I think that that is something that's maybe happening in the work on a physical or visual level, that is a way for me to sort of push through that, but not necessarily in like a direct like language. If the visual and the physical is a language in order to explore that for myself. I want to
I'll pass so you can get to the other questions.
Sorry. Yeah, just always want to make sure that people in the chat aren't getting neglected. So first question, Denise, great question. Do you find that as you get older, you're connecting to the freedom of creation because everything can become so monotonous? I would say that life definitely feels monotonous at times. Oh, Toby just put in a dream of a link. Sorry, I'm getting distracted here. So that's good. So yeah, I think I get, in all honesty, I get bored of selling my time to other people for money. That's like a really hard thing, but it's just how our society is set up and it's how we pay our bills. And I think the thing that I find monotonous is having the opportunities to make decisions in my day-to-day like get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, where it's just like on Mondays I do this and on Tuesdays I do this, and I'm part of what makes life enjoyable is having responsibilities and honoring those to other people. But I think that sometimes it feels like and maybe it's like selfish of me, but if like 95% of my sort of responsibilities are fulfilling things for other people and I'm not getting to make decisions, and it's not like I want to like live by myself and only like not have to deal with people. That's not what I'm, people make the world interesting. But so I don't really know if I'm answering the question. I do seek a sense of freedom in the studio because that is I am making decisions about how I'm spending my time. I'm having to carve that time out, or find the energy to do it, because a large portion of my time is sort of sold to other people. But I also know that I've talked to Dawn about this before, where even if I had like 8 hours in the day where I could work in the studio, there would be like less of a pressure and less of a like passion to do it in some senses. And so we've talked about how we're not sure maybe if we were full-time artists, if we would even make that much more work, because we'd have like more time to sort of like be lazy about it, if that makes sense. So yes, life is monotonous at times, and yes, I enjoy the freedom of the studio. Dalton had a question about slowing down in relationship to recalibration. And in relationship to the speed at which technology pushes our cognitive bandwidth. 100%. I feel that I try to find activities that are in conflict or opposition to that cognitive bandwidth of technology that you describe. And for me, like art making, gardening, and reading are like the only things that are activities that oppose that. Like it's so crazy. Like I think people think that I'm not like online that much because I don't do social media, but it's like I spend way more time on my phone than I want. And it's just like, it's like a totally addictive thing that is just like, yeah, keep watching me, like to be distracted, just like turn your brain off. And like, but it doesn't like, I don't feel rejuvenated after it. It's just like, oh, I don't have any energy other than to just scroll the internet on my phone. But then I don't regain any energy from that activity. And I feel that like, if I read a book, like the first 5 to 10 minutes is like, it's kind of hard. I'm kind of bored. I should just like look at my phone. But then like, if I could do it for 50 to 20 minutes, I'm like, oh, this is totally interesting. And I'm like, just focused on this singular thing. And it's like, I can't like turn the pages really fast because it's boring. And so, yes, I would say that it's important to me to have activities in my life that are in opposition to that digital speed. We might be getting near the end of our time. However, do we have a time limit?
We're getting close to an hour. We've probably got a few minutes left, maybe for one, maybe two more questions.
Great. If anyone needs to go, like, please don't feel it's not rude if you have things that you need to get to. So, but feel free. But yeah, are there any other questions that anyone would like to ask? That's great. That sounds like the longest Zoom silence I've ever experienced. I almost didn't want to say anything. Do I have any new favorite artists? That's a good question. And thank you, Dalton, and Regan. Gosh, I'm like the lamest artist sometimes. Like people like ask me like what I'm listening to, and it's like, I don't know, like Steve Miller Band or something. It's like I am not on the cusp of like new things, and I want to be. And I think that it's important for artists to be researching other artists. I force myself, and perhaps this is a weakness of mine, but I spend more time like reading biographies of older artists, like Caravaggio or Bernini, and I'm really interested in Daumier right now and his drawing style, as well as like sort of like political cartoons from the Victorian era. But that probably makes me not seem very cool because I don't have any cool names to throw out of new artists. So I don't know. I feel like I research ideas and art history, but there's a weakness of me that I'm not up to date on contemporary artists. I think maybe it just feels overwhelming. Like it feels like if I was to really be hip and know all the artists, I would have to like invest like a large portion of my weekly time to do that. And maybe I feel so inadequate to do that I'm just like, oh man, I'm just not even gonna try. Hope nobody asks. But I think it's an awesome question. And next time we chat, Mario, I hope I have some better words for you. Toby said that all those guys I mentioned are dead. It's true.
I think that's about it as far as time.
Cool.
I want to thank everybody for joining us. And thank you, Don, and thank you, Matt, for very interesting and informative conversation. The exhibition is up through Saturday, the 16th. Wednesday through Friday, our hours are 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then on Saturday, noon to 5, if anyone wants to try and get by to see the show before it closes. Anything else in closing?
Just thank you to everyone. Thank you guys for your friendships and your support. Definitely read Gretchen's essay. It's awesome. And Don, thank you for agreeing to participate in this format. And thank you for your questions.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Good to see you.
You too.